What's on your radar, Briahna?
Well, Robbie, millions of French protesters have taken to the streets of Paris this week to protest Macron's plan to raise the retirement age to 64. There's no constituency pushing for this plan. He was unable to pass legislation democratically, facing opposition from the left and the right, and tried to use his executive powers to push it through, which is part of why we're seeing such a robust pushback from the people of France, with rail workers, teachers, and sanitation workers all going on strike at various points. But in America, it's a different story. Neoliberal corporatists in both parties have hatched and endorsed plans to raise the retirement age over and over again. And never do we see this kind of pushback. Instead, even some self-described progressives have become inured to the think tank-driven talking points about the need to raise the retirement age. Yesterday, apparently drawn to the subject by the French uprising, Brooklyn-based journalist and identitarian feminist progressive Jill Filipovic took time out of a high-end writers' retreat in East Africa to ponder whether raising the retirement age wasn't such a bad idea after all. After all, she mused, in nations where populations are healthier and are living longer, doesn't it just make sense to work a little longer? Let me tell you why it doesn't. First off, workers have been working harder and productivity has been increasing steadily, and yet the benefits of that labor have been going to a smaller and smaller sliver of elites. The dream of yesteryear was that increased productivity and better technology would lead to fewer work hours for the general population over time. Yet that hasn't happened. Why? Well, for one, increased productivity does not benefit everyone equally. We are, in fact, in the middle of a new Gilded Age, where the elites who benefit from your labor have more and more leisure time, while working people have to staff Walmarts into their 70s or drive Ubers to continue to support themselves and their families long after, historically, they would have drawn pensions. As one poster asked of Jill, why should the benefits of longer life and health accrue to employers as more exploitable hours of labor, rather than to individuals in the form of a longer, healthier retirement? Especially given that the rich have been paying a smaller and smaller portion of their spoils to taxes. In the 1960s, when pensions were more reliable, the top marginal tax rate was 91%. That applied to single filer salaries over $200,000, which in today's dollars would apply to earnings over about $1.5 million for a single filer. Today, the top tax rate is 37% and only applies to money earned after your first $500,000 or so. But despite keeping much more of their cash, the 1% pays a much lower proportion of their wealth toward Social Security. Maximum taxable income for Social Security is about $160,000 a year, meaning that a nurse anesthesiologist pays the same into Social Security as Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. Moreover, earnings for those who make more than the max tax have ballooned in comparison to earnings growth for those who make less than that maximum tax, meaning that while the rich are getting richer and have more money to spare, the tax becomes increasingly regressive. As it turns out, eliminating the payroll cap would raise more than $1 trillion in revenue over a 10-year period. And since richer people live longer, it makes sense that they should pay more into the retirement system. Currently, the richest American men live 15 years longer on average than the poorest American men, meaning that low-income and working-class Americans are paying more into a system they don't benefit as much from. And longevity gaps also appear between those with bachelor's degrees and those without. The rich are living longer, earning more, and reaping those benefits. They're also the ones lobbying Congress with their extra dough to raise the entire retirement age. Keep in mind that these people are not working traditional jobs to begin with. Folks like Jill Filipovic, who opine about how much working longer makes so much sense, are often in sedentary desk jobs like journalism or podcasting. They're not conceptualizing what it means to be a 70-year-old Uber driver or sanitation worker. While Twitter warriors opine about how working a few extra years is no big deal, rideshare companies are actively recruiting senior drivers, exploiting the fact that fewer and fewer people can actually afford to retire at all. Only 22% of Americans say they have enough money to comfortably retire at all. That dream is out of reach for Americans like Maria Rios, who at 75 had worked a food prep job at the Phoenix International Airport for 17 years, making $14.50 an hour. Her husband received $400 a month in Social Security benefits, and while Maria said she'd like to retire, she couldn't afford to, even though she was battling ovarian cancer. Even putting aside the effect income has on life expectancy overall is lagging in the United States behind peer countries. And it's worse in red conservative states, which ironically are headed by the very conservative politicians who often push to cut Social Security. Mississippi, West Virginia, Louisiana, Alabama, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Oklahoma, those top the list of lowest life expectancy states. As Tom Friedman put it in an op-ed he wrote at the end of last year in the Times, one way to think about all of this, which is only a slight caricature, is that Republicans are telling janitors in Oklahoma they can't get benefits in their 60s, even though their life expectancy hasn't gone up by much, because lawyers in New York are living longer. When Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, suggests, and I quote, "We're going to have to adjust the age one more time," did he realize that his state is number 10 on America's lowest life expectancy list? Or does he just not care? Jill Filipovic was the character of the day on Twitter yesterday, but she's far from the only person in the laptop class, a class I belong to look upon the French protests and confusion. Writer and Paris resident Thomas Chatterton Williams, who's a thoughtful writer whose work I often enjoy, opined last week that he, quote, never understood the French desire to retire as soon as possible and then have a decade or 2 or 3 to do what you really want on a pension. He said, "I always thought work was fundamental to my sense of self, and I'd do it till the end. Now I just hope that AI won't take that future away." In response, leftist professor Catherine Liu made the point I've been making for the last 10 minutes or so of this radar much more succinctly. She said, "Have you ever done physical manual labor or driven a metro train for 8 hours a day for years at a time?" That really is the question. While credentialed elites may think of work as central to our identity and may engage in work that is not physically strenuous, and maybe even improves over time because it relies on experience and intellectual growth, that's not necessarily the reality for millions of American workers for whom work is work, and who spend long, hard hours driving trucks across the country, bagging groceries, attending to the elderly, or working construction. These workers deserve to retire before their bodies give out on them, and to enjoy their old age with their families, especially given that their old age is likely to be significantly more brief than that of wealthier Americans. Elites are bargaining away other people's futures. Their ability to retire isn't contingent on Social Security payments anyway. They have ample savings outside of those sums to rely on. Their interests are not necessarily your interests. The French seem to understand that, and working people in that country are showing an incredible amount of solidarity with each other against elites who would rather work them to death than tax the rich. If neoliberal corporatists try to raise the American workers' retirement age again, will American workers stand together and fight, or will they follow the laptop class's advice and simply toil on? I'm afraid we'll find out soon enough. So, Robbie, this was in part sparked by an exchange that we had the other day.
I know, we disagree here. That's okay.
Tell me why, Robbie.
Look, it's not, you can retire whenever you want. What we're really talking about is what is the age at which you become someone else's obligation to take care of. It is mandatory for the taxpayers or other people to provide for you. That's the question.
The people who are retiring, though, Robbie, are the taxpayers. Social Security isn't an entitlement. People pay into that program. It's a savings fund that the government sets up so that people can afford to retire. Before Social Security, you literally had old people
insolvent by the time people our age and younger get there.
So there's two things on that. One, Social Security was designed to require funding in a way that other government programs don't, so that it's facing these kind of fake insolvency crises routinely in a way that, let's say, military spending does not, because there's no obligation there. At the same time, if you did want to make it insolvent, there are ways to do so. For example, raising this artificial cap on what percentage of one's salary pays towards Social Security. One might ask, if rich people are living longer, if they have more money, why is it that anybody over $160,000 a year in earning is paying the exact same amount to Social Security as someone who makes much less than that?
I mean, it comes down to a philosophical difference between us. I don't want to confiscate more money from people who earned it.
What's the justification for the Social Security tax to be regressive? If you, on some level, acknowledge there should be Social Security, people should pay into Social Security, why should there be an artificial maximum cap instead of it being a percentage of your income, regardless of if you make millions or billions of dollars a year or you make tens of thousands of dollars a year?
I guess I don't feel very strongly about that. Maybe it should be a percentage of your income anyway. I mean, you were talking about 91% of people's income after they reach a certain threshold. That seems crazy to me.
That wasn't a Social Security tax. That was the generalized tax at a time in American history. Wait a minute. But that was at a time in American history that a lot of people look back to very fondly, when people felt a lot more secure, not everybody obviously, but a lot of people felt more secure in their retirement. And by the way, that was the equivalent of taxes over having earned about $1.5 million. Anything you earn over your first $1.5 million as a single filer in 1960,
I know that's
whatever.
not chump change, but I think that's pretty authoritarian for the government to take that much of your wealth.
The question is, if I make billions of dollars a year, isn't a percentage tax on my income worth less to me because of the, there's Maslow's hierarchies of needs. There's basically that everybody needs food, clothes, shelter, and the diminishing value of money after a certain point is a real statistically observable economic phenomenon. That being the case, if money is worth less to extremely rich people than working class or low income people, why is it that they pay a lower percentage of their tax into a system to support people in retirement when rich people aren't even relying on Social Security? They have their own wealth. They're not relying on the Social Security payments to survive to begin with. Why is it that poor people should be paying more into a system, especially when they're not even living as long as rich people, to draw down on the payments that they've provided?
I guess I would say that a better way, or a way I would prefer to solve this problem, is look at what is driving up the cost, making it more difficult to retire and still have enough money because everything costs more: food, gas, housing, the education you're trying to provide for your kids along the way. And do we have policies in place that have artificially blown up the cost of those things even over the last several decades?
I think that's fine to look at.
Healthcare and education in particular.
I definitely. Well, one good thing that seniors have going for them is that we do have Medicare for all. I mean, we have Medicare. We have free health care for people at least when they're over 65. But this is part of the issue. You're completely right that inflation has been concentrated in education, food, and transportation and health care. One of the education piece for seniors is a big issue. The fastest growing population that's indebted to, has student loan debt, is actually seniors. And so I think you're absolutely right. People are using their Social Security payments to pay off student loans in a way that has never been the case in American history. Those are problems that are coexisting. Fundamentally, however, you're going to have to figure out with these insolvency problems, they're being used as a political stick to get people to want to raise the retirement age, which is not actually solving the problem. It's just further skewing it to become a system where the most long-living, affluent people are able to take advantage of a system that the poorest people who are paying disproportionately more into it are dying too soon to actually
The elderly,
exploit.
on average, are more affluent than other sectors of our society, which I tend to see this as a great wealth confiscation from younger people to older people.
It's the younger people who are protesting in France because they
I know, it's very kind of all the young people all over the world who want to support their elderly forever.
They don't know that they'll ever be able to retire. They don't know that they'll ever be able to make it. We have all of these, I think, really important conversations about the decline of the white life expectancy in particular, which has never happened in the United States. These diseases of despair that are racking these part of whatever reason that people are dying, there are young people who are in their 20s and 30s that are paying into these systems who are very skeptical that they're going to make it to 65.
They should be skeptical that they'll see any benefit to these symptoms when they get to that.
Much less to 67 or to 70, which is what Republicans and Democrats, I would say, that neoliberals across the political spectrum want to do. So, I'm interested to hear more from you guys in the audience about how you're feeling about the sustainability of these systems, and we'll have more Rising for you after this.